Thank you for tuning in to the National Principals Month virtual Capitol Hill briefing. My name is Nicole Gaudiano and I cover education for Politico, and I will be your moderator. Each year, the American Federation of School Administrators, National Association of Elementary School Principals, and the National Association of Secondary School Principals join together in October for a month-long celebration of principals and their work to better their students. With the ongoing pandemic this year, the celebration is virtual and includes this event, Principals and the Pandemic, how school leaders are navigating COVID-19. You can learn more about the National Principals Month by visiting the official website at principalsmonth.org. You can also interact with the webinar and panelists today via the Zoom chat function or on social media using the hashtag #ThankAPrincipal. We have a great panel for you today. Panelists, please introduce yourselves and tell us what mode of learning your school is in right now, virtual, hybrid, or in person.
My name is Cesar Rivera. I'm at Samuels Elementary in Denver, Colorado. And currently our school is in both in-person and virtual. And so that's different from hybrid, just to let everybody understand. We do have actual kids in the building 5 days a week, and virtual learning happening 5 days a week as well, separate from in-person.
Good afternoon. I am Robert Motley, principal of Atholton High School in Columbia, Maryland, and also president of the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Atholton is a comprehensive high school of 1,500 students, and we are all virtual right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimbrell Barbosa Lewis, the principal of Cordova Elementary in Shelby County, Tennessee, near the Memphis area. My school is a pre-K through 5th grade school that is all virtual. Our district is all virtual at this time. I'm also the president of the National Association of Elementary School Principals.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, let's start with some questions about the principal's role during this pandemic. As this school year begins, principals are grappling with tremendous challenges posed by COVID-19. Maybe we can start with Robert. How have your priorities shifted, and what does your schedule look like? And are there ways you think that your job will continue to be different after the pandemic?
Thanks, Nicole. Good question. You know, as far as priorities shifted, I don't think that they truly have shifted. What I do think has happened is I think that people are a little bit more cognizant and aware of what the principal actually does, right? We have been leading this Herculean work to keep students safe and safeguard their welfare under extreme difficult circumstances. And it just reminds us that schools are more than just a place of learning, that they are just centers of community. And it's something that we've always done, but I think people are seeing it more now given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. There is that shift, from a very academic to really a more socio-emotional, making sure our kids and families are safe and okay, and their well-being is being taken care of. But as difficult as remote learning has been, we principals are least able to still fill that role of instructional leader. And we're working with teachers on curriculum and instruction. We're visiting virtual classrooms and providing feedback. Instructional leadership, it looks a little different in this virtual environment though, so.
How about you, Cesar? I remember you were mentioning that there was a challenge with the 2 lanes, you had called it, of education. Was there anything that you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, so our resources as principals have been incredibly stretched thin during this time of COVID. So for example, in our district, we have an option for parents to send their children to in-person learning or to send their children to virtual learning, whatever they think is going to be best for them and their families. And so we had to basically build 2 different schools, one virtual and one in-person, with nearly the same amount of staffing for each particular school. So what that called for was to take some teachers who might not have ever taught a particular subject or may not have taught a particular grade level and push them into positions to serve kids, perhaps in the virtual space, perhaps in the in-person space. All the while, life is happening. You know, we have teachers who had to go on leave for whatever reason, who might have midstream been scheduled for in-person learning, and then life happened, and it happens, and then they had to go virtual. And so all of this shift, like what Robert has talked about, all of this shift that has happened has indeed been continuous and has continued to affect our two schools that we're running, both virtual and in person. So just the other day, on Friday, and then again on Monday, I had a staff member who communicated to me that they were going to go, that they needed an accommodation and were going to go remote. And so that took them entirely out of the in-person space. And so as somebody leaves that in-person space and is pushed into the virtual space, that leaves a gap. And we as leaders have had to solve for those gaps repeatedly throughout the school, whether we've been 100% remote or half and half or hybrid. It has been an incredible challenge for leaders across, certainly across Denver, I imagine for leaders across the nation.
Kimberly, I see you nodding. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, our district switches to hybrid in the spring, so Caesar may be giving you a call to find out how you're managing those two schools. So.
I wonder if you had to, did you have to boost staff, or were you able to make that work without?
Yeah, one would think with additional needs as far as staffing the two schools, that there would be an influx of resources, and those being human resources to staff those two schools. Not the case. Really, what we had to do was staff our schools with the existing personnel. So you could imagine where we needed an entire classroom full-time employee. We would have to take a person that might be out of the classroom. Let's say they're a teacher coach out of that scenario, and then push them into a classroom, whether that's virtual or in person. We might have to take an interventionist who's serving kids with moderate to severe needs and push them into a classroom, an entire classroom setting to teach a full class of children. So we've had to make those adjustments. All the while, they're not people to replace the people that have been in these positions. So we don't have another interventionist. We don't have another teacher coach. They're teaching children in classrooms, either virtual or in person. And there hasn't been, additional resources to pay for people. Not that people are necessarily clamoring to teach children during a pandemic, but even if, we just don't have the money to sign somebody up for these teaching positions that are essentially left vacated.
Yeah, another challenge is supporting at-risk students and rethinking how to provide educational services. I'd like to start with Kimbrell on this one. And by the way, I saw you nodding when Caesar was talking, so if you want to speak about that issue as well, please go ahead. But otherwise, how have you shifted services to support especially vulnerable students, the students with learning disabilities, English language learners, students experiencing homelessness?
Right. So I was nodding because as a principal, I can relate to everything that Caesar is experiencing and the resources and lacks of resources for basically in our setting, a completely virtual school. When you think about students who are vulnerable, students with disabilities, our ESL population, which we have a large ESL population as well, we have to be very creative. We are able to do small groups through the virtual setting for those students. My ESL teachers also do somewhat of a version of home visits. It can only be at the door because of social distancing, but they are able to drop off supplies. Parents are able to participate in IEP meetings virtually. When we think about students who are homeless or who do not have as many resources, our district also allows our counselors are able to engage in small groups, also with the parents virtually through, we use Teams. We also recently, there has been availability of for our students who fall below the poverty line, which is a great number of students in our district. There is availability of now spending cards for food. Our district also provides meals. There are weekly pickups at every school, including ours, for meals so that all students have breakfast and lunch for every day. And that cycle continues. So every week they are able to pick up. But it is unique. It can be a struggle. There is never enough staffing, and that is one reason why the relief from Congress is very essential. When people think about the stimulus package, we know that it's for the economy, but that $175 billion also is part of a stimulus package for schools. And so that's really important when Caesar mentioned that, you have a dual school running. Robert mentioned he's going to be there in the spring. We will also be there in the spring. We will have students who are at home, students who are at school, and teachers in our district have the option of being at home or at school. And so you think about, there are going to be some gaps there with personnel, and so much is needed to continue the through line of learning.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as you go through all of this, I'm wondering if you feel like you have what you need to address one of the things that has been, this has made clear, the pandemic has made clear that there's going to be learning loss. Do you feel like you have enough to address that?
Well, I think that our district is doing a fantastic job to put things into place for learning loss. We have Saturday academies, and it's free they're virtual, but they are free for all students. We also have academies during any break. So last week was fall break. All of our students were able to sign up, and learning loss is addressed during those times. So I think that our district is doing a great job to put things into place. We know that in the future, we'll see exactly in the near future, in the next year to 2 years, exactly how the pandemic and being in virtual learning and less structure back in the spring, much more structure now, how all of that's going to affect our students and the learning. We also still have our response to intervention times for students who have even more needs for learning, for addressing their learning loss.
We're also hearing about drops in enrollment and many at-risk students missing classes. Caesar, I think we talked about this earlier. Are you experiencing that? And do you have any concerns about lower enrollment and how that may exacerbate inequities in the system?
Yeah, I think our model currently of per pupil funding, whether it's within our state or nationwide, is entirely inadequate for not only funding in normal times, but especially funding during this pandemic. And so when I say that, know that in this pandemic, were things normal, we would have been at my school approximately $200,000 short enrollment-wise. Fortunately, in the state of Colorado, you can take the average of a number of years and apply that during times of emergency. So fortunately, we were able to maintain the budget that we were projected for, albeit still, I believe, inadequate. I talked a little bit about interventionists, right? And so, in the public school, we don't have enough intervention teachers, not only during normal times, but then also during a pandemic where we have, I think we have not even a full FTE, probably 0.75 of an FTE to apply interventions to children who need more interventions. And so when we think of the resources that we have or don't have, we think of how thinly spread those are and how quickly they go away. And so per pupil funding, I believe, has to be revisited as both a state and then a nation. We need more money. The $175 billion that Kimbrell was mentioning is needed now more than ever, and can be the continuation of the start to do more by schools, to put our priorities on schools federally, much more so than we've done in the past. And so schools need Congress more now than ever to put forward a package that can meaningfully support schools, but not only meaningfully support schools, but perhaps sustainably support schools, such that we do have more intervention teachers that can address the gaps that students have. If my school were to staff an interventionist for approximately 6 kids per group, for all of the kids that are reading at or below grade level, or need more mathematics in their day to be at or above grade level, we would have approximately 13 interventionists, which would be, approximately $1.3 million, which is what we don't have for 13 interventionists yet, and still we need to do more. And that funding is dire, especially now. Can you imagine when we get to the fall of 2021, if we're talking about learning loss and supporting the closing of the gap that exists as far as learning loss is concerned, we're going to need more individuals that can apply interventions within our school that can help to supplement all of the great work that our teachers are doing and continue to do, but we just need more.
You touched on this, but school closures and the disruptions are causing trauma and increased mental health challenges for students. It's upending support systems, leading to isolation, anxiety. There may be additional trauma from food insecurity or from a parent losing a job. I want to direct this to Robert. Does your school have sufficient resources to provide mental health services, either in person or virtually? I'm talking about training for staff, sufficient school psychologists, counselors.
So you can never have enough, right? But I will say that the district in which I, work, we are very fortunate, and we recognize how fortunate we are with some of the resources that we have. I have a 0.8 school psychologist. I have a full-time nurse. I have 5 counselors. I have the support staff in place. They're overwhelmed. Even with all of that, they are overwhelmed. And so we can always use more. We find that our students, this environment is not conducive to them. We just did an audit. We have more D's and E's at this point in time than we've ever had before. And we're considered to be a high-performing school. This model is not working for our kids. And so how do we transition and work towards getting them to where they need to be successful? The funding that needs to come from our government is crucial and critical to that, because it's more than just about opening schools. We hear this debate, open schools, open schools, open schools. Well, we're the principals are the ones that have to implement that process and what it looks like to make sure that it's done safe, that our kids are safe, that our staff, our teachers are safe. And so, and in order to do that, to bring 1,500 kids back into a building requires significant modifications to the building in order for there to be social distancing and everything else going on. And so where does that money come from? I'm going to sidebar here for a little bit and make a political statement, but we're in the midst of a presidential election, and yet education is not one of the things being talked about. It blows my mind, and I'm hoping that tonight during the debate that it at least comes up, that we talk about funding for education given everything that's happening with COVID. So resources, are always, and I can't even begin to imagine what some of my colleagues across this country are going through, because we have resources. We could definitely use more, but there are many that are starting at a deficit. We're at least starting on an even playing field, but there are many of my colleagues across this nation that are starting from a deficit.
And we know that, I mean, there's another aspect to this. We know that students have witnessed violence against Black people, and the resulting uprisings in cities have caused additional trauma and grief. I'll put this out, either Caesar or Kimbrell. Do principals need additional support to elevate these conversations, provide training for teachers, and help the students that are experiencing that trauma?
The answer very simply is yes. Like Robert, in some ways our district is very fortunate because in the state of Tennessee, 2 years ago, the ratio for counselors changed, where there's one, you have to have more than one if you have 500 students. So we have 2 at our school. But if you think about that, that was 2 years ago, before the pandemic, before the documentation of racial violence that continues. Our students are in a much more severe time. As Caesar talked about, our funding has decreased because, as you mentioned, Nicole, almost all enrollment is down. And so when you think about that, I have 2 counselors, and I also have a behavior specialist who focuses on social emotional needs of students. That's 3 people, in addition to the teachers, to work with 800 students who are mainly of color, who are not only experiencing the pandemic and health issues within families, the poverty that they live in, but who are also experiencing the trauma of seeing people who look like them killed for just being people who look like them. There isn't enough staff right now to address those needs. Counselors have been wonderful, and our behavior specialist has been wonderful in taking class time and exploratory time to go in and have virtual meetings with students to talk to them about coping and talk to them about their needs. But when you think about that, as Caesar talked about, that's 3 people for 800 students in a rotation every week. And so they may not see those students again for many, many weeks. And so those resources are there, but they're stretched so very thin. We share a counselor with a school psychologist with 3 other schools. And so we mainly see her for things like IEP meetings or 504 meetings. We have a social worker that we share with 4 other schools who has done in the past small group instruction for students. But at a time that the game has completely changed, education has completely changed, revolving around the needs of students, there is so much more that's needed to meet those needs.
What are students telling you about their experience? And go ahead, we could come back to that question.
I just have to say, because I think I mentioned earlier that, you know, schools are more than places of learning. They're like centers of the community, right? And so if your community's burning on fire, you as a school and as a school leader, you have to address what's happening around you, because you can't ignore it. And so we at my school, when everything was happening, we began by having what we called virtual chats. And so I invited first my staff. How are you dealing and processing with all of this? And, you know, it forced them to look at their own implicit biases and what that means, and how to move forward and how to become a better educator in recognition of all of that. We had an opportunity for our students to kind of talk about, you know, their experiences and how everything is, you know, is resonating with them. And so it really led to a great opportunity for me as a leader to provide an opportunity for some professional learning for my community, right? Because again, it's more than just a place of learning, it's a community. And so we actually started a community book discussion. Actually, I have right here, it's a book called Stamped. And so parents, teachers, and students are all involved in this virtual book discussion that we have. And so once a month, so our next meeting is next week, it's chapters 1 through 3, and we'll have a discussion, and it's led by, you know, one of my teachers who's a facilitator. And so it just allows, you cannot continue and function without addressing what's happening around you. And so we've really taken some positive actions to do that.
Yeah, that going back to support for teachers, when you think of all of the trauma that teachers engage with during their day, and you think of all of the anxiety that has built up in the leading up to in-person learning, whether it happened in the very beginning of the year or not. In our case in Denver, we were leading up to in-person learning in the very beginning of the year. And then we about face went to remote learning 100%, and then had a phase in of in-person learning. Well, all of that buildup and the anxiety as far as, am I going to go into a safe space in my school? And then even if I know that it's a safe space, is it really a safe space? And all the stress I think that has caused teachers who are, in some cases, immunocompromised. In other cases, perhaps they're living with somebody who's immunocompromised. And in other cases, perhaps they're caring for someone who's immunocompromised. This has taken quite a toll on our teachers, and quite a toll that, quite frankly, I believe most, if not all, principals are not equipped to handle, are not equipped to support teachers in the way in which they need support. And I don't think our system is equipped to support teachers in the way that they need support. In Denver Public Schools, we, as part of our employee assistance program, teachers can call in and get a number of free sessions as far as a mental health check-in, or if they're struggling. And it's this cold kind of call center that they're engaging in. And then it refers them to whatever resource that they need at the time. And then perhaps they're able to talk to somebody and make that connection. But as you know, when you're in need, and when you're in crisis, and teachers have been in crisis during this time, to have to go through another step to get what you need as far as your mental health is concerned, it's that much more of a barrier that shouldn't be there. Our teachers should have ready access to mental health supports across our districts, across our country. And that is not something that we've equipped our schools with, whether it's through CARES Act money or through any other proposed money that might go to schools. But what we're realizing right now is, in order to take care of our children in our schools, we absolutely need to take care of our adults.
I wonder if one of you could just explain some of the things that you're hearing from the children when it comes to trauma or any issues that they're having. Anything that would help describe the need, for which you're speaking.
It's significant. It's significant. We, got into, I think, maybe the first week of remote learning, and there was a child that we had to do a suicide risk review on. So children are, and this is elementary school, right? I'm an elementary school principal. I have 500 kids, grades ECE through 5th grade. This is elementary. And this is not, the first time that this has happened, but could you imagine supporting a child and a family in the remote learning context around a suicide risk review? And the scary thing, I think the thing that takes the most toll on educators or those who are servicing kids is when that child or their parent is then not responsive. So you hear that there's a risk that the child may harm themselves or may have a plan, and then you're not able to immediately follow up with the child. It's not like in-person learning, when they're gonna, perhaps if you don't get a hold of them, you see them the next day and you're able to follow up in some way, shape, or form in the way that we need to. But that's a wrenching example of how significant and how quickly a need can develop with children, that we need to provide guidance to their parents and then wrap around supports to help that child. But it can happen that quickly.
I would also say that with our students, many are experiencing loss from COVID. Their parents are stretched very thin financially because of additional costs or losing their jobs. And they don't know what to do. They don't know how to express their frustrations. They don't know how to express the losses that they are experiencing. Many of our children, many of our families have lost from COVID, and they're not able to attend those funerals or see those family members before the loss. And of course, they're very sudden losses. And then you have parents who have lost their positions, or their jobs keep them from being able to be with their children during the learning time. So then you have those parents and families who are reaching out to resources for places for their children to go for virtual learning. Our district has this year provided one-to-one devices, which we didn't previously have. However, some students you can only get a hotspot if you fall below a certain income level. Well, we know with how far we are all stretched right now, even those who don't fall below the income level really need some additional resources. So there are families and children who are just experiencing so much during COVID that taking one step towards remedying one situation leaves 10 more situations to deal with while they're still trying to work or find jobs, while they're losing loved ones, and while those children are trying to learn when their parents may not be able to fully support them.
And I would just like to add and to provide that secondary lens, right, is our kids are experiencing a whole different kind of pressure, because I've got kids that are at working age. And if the family is struggling and they need money, then there's that pressure that my student needs to provide and work. And so then the question becomes, how do we look at alternative ways of assessment to accommodate family situations? So if I've got a 17-year-old that has to work, I was on the phone yesterday evening with a student who is not showing up to his synchronous classes, but turning the work in, right? But we have that rigid requirement, you got to show up. So I'm like, Charles, what's going on? Why are you not? Well, I got a job at UPS because I need to help my family, And so how do you, or why are we penalizing a student in this situation for not showing up to that synchronous time? Still able, he's working, working during the day, and at night he's doing his work and turning it in, but yet he's being penalized because he's not showing up to that synchronous time. That we have to re-examine how we are assessing students given the extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in right now.
There was a question. I think there was a question from the chat. Let me look real quick. Just about, since you brought up assessments, there were questions that are being asked about how you're handling that during this year, even though it looks like there won't be waivers from the Department of Education.
It's unfortunate that there are not those waivers when, as I described, we're having teachers teach content areas that they've never taught before. We're having teachers engage with children in ways that they were not hired for. And yet and still we're holding them to the same standard that we've ever held them to. And let's just be clear that standard is a standard that has equated to apartheid education across our country, where our system of school choice has done nothing for Black and brown children. And yet and still we insist on having our children take standardized testing during a pandemic. We are so fixated on testing and all the strings attached as far as school funding that go along with it. And one of the things that I was considering as far as the $175 billion ask that we're making here is that $175 billion, please do not make the string be attached to that money such that we're bound to take these standardized tests. We don't have a waiver, and I would say we don't have a waiver yet.
So I agree with you 100%, Caesar. In the state of Tennessee, our governor recently said that we will not have our state assessment in the spring. And of course, we didn't have it in this past spring. However, how does that affect our federal funding? I don't know. I don't know that yet. We still have formative assessments that our students are required to take from home. We still have assessments that are required that they're taking from home. And there's a learning loss, there's a learning gap. And we know that accountability is really what it's about. It's about accountability. Someone has to be accountable for the scores, the assessments, the results. But accountability has to change because life has changed. How we all live each day has changed, and what our students are dealing with and our teachers are dealing with and principals are facing has changed drastically. When our Secretary of Education says that the Department of Education is not responsible for tracking COVID and how it affects schools and how it affects enrollment, there's a problem there. There's a problem because how are you going to assess the needs if the department that is responsible is not responsible? That puts further burden on schools, school leaders, school districts, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult for a school district to say, I'm missing thousands of students in my district during COVID, but I'm not going to get the funding that's needed, and I have more needs for my students. It's very difficult to still be held to assessments when you have no funding and you have students in crisis.
So I don't think a decision has been finalized yet for Maryland. I think we were told in January we'll get more information regarding our state testing. But again, at the secondary level, I've got juniors and seniors that are trying to take the SAT and the ACT and get ready for school. And I love that some of the colleges have made it, okay, we're going to waive that requirement. We're not going to require that. But then I've got kids enrolled in AP classes as well, and their AP exams. And so I guess, I get it. My request is that we re-examine how we assess what we assess, and given the situations that we find ourselves in, how do we still provide the rigor and the opportunity for students? Because AP exams, that's a wonderful way to gain that college credit beforehand, right? So how do we still provide those opportunities for students without penalizing them? And I think we need to be I would love to see heads come together and come out with some really creative ways in which we can work that works for our students. That's my ask.
I think that punitive culture of school districts is something that we really need to grapple with in this time, especially. We've seen across the country school closures. My district is, we've had 30 plus school closures since 2010. And the beat goes on, right? We've still got some school closures that are scheduled yet and still, where, what we're telling our communities, what we're telling children, what we're telling young adults is that what you've done so far is not good enough by said standard, by the standard of ACT, by the standard of SAT. And what is that standard exactly? Well, the last time I checked, the last time I read some research on this, that was based on a child's socioeconomic status and the education level of attainment by their parents. And then what does that tell us? Well, better off folk are generally white folk, and less better off folk are generally Black and brown folk. And so what has that told us? Well, this system of, again, this apartheid education that I mentioned before, and that's, Jonathan Kozol calls it apartheid education. is something that has been perpetuated, that has created this great inequity and great inequality in education that we've seen. If there's one thing that I find hope with, it is in those test optional colleges that have said enough is enough with ACT, enough is enough with SAT. These are assessments that are rooted in racism, and we cannot have this go on anymore. And so we've got to follow the lead of our test optional colleges and say to ourselves, what meaningful way do we really want to assess children that is not based on economics, that does not come down to race, that is actually some way to determine authentically how children are really doing? And this notion even of learning loss, you know, it's learning loss in relation to the standards that we've built for our children, those Common Core standards, which again, the last time that I checked, are based on testing. And so, you know, when we think about revisiting those standards, revisiting the authenticity that should be education, and revisiting the notion of what our children are working on in order to be meaningful, then we've really got to put to the test what it is as far as meaning, and what privileged kids then, and who, by the way, aren't tested as much. Yes, they take the SAT. Yes, they take the ACT. But as far as standardized testing, many privileged children who now more so are going to private schools aren't being tested on those standardized state tests that we have. We've got, like, what is their experience as far as assessment? Because I know that they're not taking those tests. And so why are we having our children take these tests when it's created such stratification and de facto segregation in our society?
And I would add to that, Caesar, this is like the prime time, right? We're in this national debate and discussion about racial injustice and implicit bias. Well, let's look at assessments and the implicit bias that goes along with that, right? And what a great opportunity to engage in that dialogue as well. So I completely agree with you.
And that's one question that's in the chat. What are we doing differently? Now, what do we think should happen differently with assessment? And that is a great question. And Caesar brought up that in schools that are funded differently, in private schools, there is no state testing. There are just assessments that go along with the coursework. Not end of course assessments, which in my state are state tests, but progress in the courses. And in this time of COVID, if our assessment was based on progress in the courses, that too might be problematic, but we could gauge where students are right now, what they still need. That's what we need to move more towards. I can't say that I have 100% of the solution, but I do think that this, as Robert spoke of, is the prime time for us to re-examine how schools are assessed, how individual students are assessed, how funding is tied to that assessment. And that's what's critical for me. If you don't make the score, then you don't get the money. That's what is problematic, especially in a time where there's severe trauma and severe lack of resources.
Shift gears and talk about the homework gap. We know that even before the crisis, students living in poverty and rural communities faced challenges finishing their homework because they couldn't easily access the internet at home. Long-term school closures have only elevated these inequities for an estimated 17 million students who don't have home internet access. K through 12 groups have called for an increase in funds for the Federal Communications Commission's E-rate program, which supports Wi-Fi hotspots, connected devices, and other services to provide internet access for schoolwork. I'm wondering if any of you would like to take this. Why is that needed?
Go ahead.
And how would it help your school?
I mean, we've heard stories across the country of principals, driving to student houses and delivering Chromebooks. This principal is no exception to that. We've heard stories of districts providing hundreds of thousands of hotspots to students. And why is that? Well, because the need is tremendous. a parent cannot stay home all day long and have their child utilize their phone's wireless connectivity. They've got to go to work eventually. And that's exactly what happened to a whole host of our children, predominantly language learners in our school, when their parents eventually were able to return to work. That all of a sudden they lost connectivity. And then they needed a hotspot from our school to continue to do their work at home, albeit not supported because their parents were then at work. And you could imagine, the younger that a child gets to not have their parent there to support them during their work, just how much learning they're engaging with because they don't have that guidance from an adult. But it's tremendous and it's unconscionable now we've exposed that gap, not to do something about closing that gap. It's almost like, you mentioned the word homework gap, but it's really, this basic technology need that all kids have been equipped with. And as a country where many of us are privileged and we hear from our privileged folk and we see glimpses of our privileged folks' reality, that we have taken for granted for whatever reason that children don't have wireless connectivity at home or don't have technology at home, when indeed they do not. And, I've been in this collaborative through the Wallace Foundation with other principals across the country. And as COVID hit, we were all talking to one another as far as devices and whether or not we had devices. And in Denver, we were somewhat lucky enough to have an influx of some devices, albeit I handed out a lot of crummy Chromebooks that had broken parts and missing keyboard pieces and were to some extent falling apart. Yet and still, at least we had those crummy Chromebooks. Some of my colleagues in Boston didn't have crummy Chromebooks to give out. They didn't have Chromebooks yet. And so it exposed this gap that we have. You think of $175 billion, we need to create infrastructure in our country such that children have readily able to access Wi-Fi, be connected, and to have a device that they can utilize for homework or for schoolwork or for continued learning while they're at home. It's just unconscionable at this level. Now that we know that that's the case, and it's very clear that we would do nothing about that. And my question is $175 billion enough to make that happen, along with all of the other needs that schools have? Or is it more? Is it more than $200 billion?
Let's talk about that, the $175 billion. That's what K through 12 groups have been pushing for an additional $175 billion to address costs to reopen schools safely. Congress provided education funding under the CARES Act, but it's more, there's another relief bill that's being discussed right now. By one estimate, an average school district will have to spend an additional $1.8 million to follow safety protocols for return to in-person learning. Meanwhile, most districts will see a decline in state and local aid because of budget shortfalls, as you all mentioned. I'm wondering if any of you all could address, have you seen these increased costs at the school level? And if you could provide some examples.
Definitely. Caesar spoke about the digital divide, and we have Chromebooks as well. We were not a one-to-one district prior to COVID and the previous funding that came out. And we were able to get Chromebooks in increments. So started with the youngest of students, then elementary, then middle, and so on. But you also think about like our students with severe needs, severe disabilities are right now virtual. And so you think about those I have students who are blind in my school. I have students who are confined to wheelchair, who have limited mobility. They still need special devices beyond Chromebooks. Again, the Wi-Fi hotspots. But then when you think about that we are going to be, just like Robert's district, in 2 months, two different learning modalities, as Caesar's district is. When you think about the safety precautions that must take place in coming into a building, the PPE that's needed, the checkpoints that are needed before anyone can come into the school. Our district is one that many students ride buses. There are no monitors to check their temperatures before they get on buses. When they get on the buses, they will come to the school, and then there will be a place for them to go if they're sick, if they have a temperature. As we talked about, parents have to work. Parents aren't able to be there. Students will be there. Who's going to monitor them? Where's that equipment? Where's that personnel going to come from? Many teachers have pre-existing conditions. Many of our students are medically fragile, because again, we have 3 classrooms in our school that are for students who have medical disabilities. And so you think about what's needed for them to stay safe. I can just think of all of these things that we need just to make sure that they're physically safe. Not to begin to mention the devices that are needed to help support those additional needs. Teachers can continue to work from home, whether students are at the school or not. That doesn't change the staffing formula. That doesn't change the budget. So then you need extra facilitators for those in-person students who come, because our teachers will be able to continue to teach virtually from home, whether their students are at school or not. They'll still be teaching those students on virtual learning. So someone's got to be in that room with those students. Who's that going to be? Where's that funding going to come from? We don't know yet. So there's a tremendous need with many factors and many questions that are unanswered about how we're going to meet those needs and come up with those resources.
And
I'll add, one of the things that I think people aren't really putting out in the forefront is really some of the costs and expenses that our teachers are incurring as a result of this switch to remote learning. My PTSA has really stepped up to kind of try and help my teachers and supplement them for all of my entire math department. They all went out and bought iPads to help facilitate their ability to teach remotely. They're buying whiteboards and things to set up in their homes. Like, our teachers are spending a lot of their own monies to really create opportunities for them to be really fantastic virtual teachers in this environment. And I don't think many people are acknowledging that as well. And so I know that we have made a concerted effort at our school to make sure that we try and, help our teachers, and they submit their receipts and everything. My PTSA has been awesome about trying to reimburse them for some of their expenses, but it has really been a financial burden for our teachers as well in that sense. So
I'd like to ask why that is, though. The CARES Act provided funding. Have you not received the funding? Has it not gotten to the right places? Why is that still happening?
I think they're just
so the CARES Act not enough?
There's such a need, and I think how many districts across this nation had to suddenly shift to a one-to-one platform? I mean, so that's probably 90% of the funds right there, right? And in helping that shift towards getting, technology in the hands of students in order for them to at least basically begin to continue to receive their education. So I would say that certainly takes a huge part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as much as the districts have done to try to support schools and ensure that they have enough PPE, I'll give you an example. We were only going to get face masks for the face shields for staff that were vulnerable, and that would have amounted to, at the time, 12 staff that would have gotten the face shields. Well, as a school, you're like, that can't be. That can't be the case. If a person wants or feels more comfortable with a face shield, then everybody should get a face shield. It goes back to, it's just better for everybody's mental health if you can, cross that off the list. Another example is, as a school, we were given approximately or fewer than 10 thermometers to check children's temperature. And again, we have 500 kids. And so thinking about in a full in-person start, how inadequate that is. And then even with having approximately half of our kids in-person learning right now, how still inadequate that is. And so the burden on purchasing more thermometers, for example, was back on the schools. And I will say to Kimbrell, man, I'm sorry to say this, but that funding that you might anticipate coming from your district to provide for additional staffing is not going to come.
I agree. I totally agree. The district doesn't have it. That's my question. Where is it going to come from? You're right there where Robert and I are going to be, and you don't have it. So when you say, when Nicole asked, what are we doing with the money? And Robert is 100% right. We had to get devices for our students. We have no additional funds right now, and I don't think we're going to get it. The district is stretched thin. I applaud my district for the tremendous amount of work that it's done. It's been very creative. Our superintendent has been at the forefront of making decisions as one of the largest school districts in the country. However, you work with what you have, and that's what we've been doing. And Caesar is 100% right. When we become like his district, when we are running two basically separate schools in one, where is that funding going to come from? I don't know.
One of our attendees brought up a different side of this problem. This person has funding to spend, but doesn't have a pool of qualified people to hire from due to the teacher shortage. This person writes that using substitutes is not acceptable, especially in a very at-risk Title I school. I need people, this attendee says.
Well, so my district has just put a survey out to its teachers. Are you planning to return? Are you going to take leave, or are you going to retire? And one of the districts in our state, they've gone back 300 teachers short because they're taking leave. They're not coming back. And I don't know what's going to happen. That is a valid concern, and I don't know how we're going to address it. There was a NASSP survey done. 45% of principals, as a result of what we're going through right now, are considering early retirement. So then you're going to compound that with leaders leaving as well as a result of all of this. So it really is a critical issue in education right now that, in my opinion, is not on people's radar, and we've got to get it on their radar.
We've seen some shifts in other fields. We've seen when COVID hit that essential workers like physicians, those that are in medical school whose licenses were pending, those were advanced in some states to get them into the field. Those are some things that we need to begin to explore in education. How can we support that those who are, we know we have a shortage, but those who are right now working on their licensure, what can we do to support that smooth transition, that early transition, to help with the shortage? That's something that we can explore, but it takes those who are above us, those who are in state and federal leadership, to make those decisions. And it's something that we'll grapple with, but we don't have much time. We don't have any time. That's got to move forward. Those are things that have to be considered.
And it's more than just the staffing part, right? Because you're right, Kim. If you excel those programs and you have the people, but research has shown when you just throw them out there, you need to have the supports in place, right? So those master teachers to work with them, to help them and guide them through the whole process. But then that's the staffing as well. So it really is a huge issue that we have.
Yeah, and let's not pretend that part of that issue hasn't been the punitive culture that has generalized across the country as far as public education is concerned, for teachers and for principals, for our children, where we haven't made it very desirable for people to be teachers. We haven't made it very desirable for teachers, for teachers to then become principals. We have created penalties for folks along the way that has made public education be as unattractive as it is during normal times. But now you add a pandemic onto it. And, last time I checked, I don't think our retirees are clamoring to get back into this COVID-filled environment that they might think is the case in our public schools.
It's quite the contrary.
They're
They're
not
like,
going to
thank
risk their
God. Yeah,
lives to come back
exactly.
and teach. Nor is the general public going to risk their lives to come back and teach as well. We've got to do more, not only now in this moment of the pandemic, but we've got to do more to create a system of valuation for our children, system of valuation for our teachers, system of valuation for our principals, system of valuation for our schools, such that it's not about penalizing schools for their test scores. It's not about penalizing schools for the resources that they aren't able to provide their children who have such widespread needs in their school. It's not about penalizing schools. We've got to do better. And where we've gotten to right now is at a place that we've got to do everything in our power to get out of. We've got to fix our public education system such that folks are motivated again to be part of it. We've got to ensure that we have the resources for our children ultimately to truly thrive. And we haven't done that. And we've got to do so much more to create equal schools. We can no longer have this Jim Crow reality that we've had in our schools. That's got to be different. There's so much work.
I'm reading from the chat. I am so short on teachers that my deputy superintendent is now teaching a class at my school. Well, we are now at 4 o'clock. With that,
oh wow, that went fast.
Yes, it did, and I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has too. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for participating, and I'd like to mention again that October is National Principals Month. Please visit principalsmonth.org to find out how to get involved throughout the month, and use hashtag #ThankAPrincipal on social media when doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Nicole.